Where is the pioneer? And what is the frontier? The call of the horizon is undeniable. It burns in the souls of men. Many are those who demand it doesn't exist, or condemn those who seek it as madmen. They subvert the truth seekers by enforcing a lust for compliance, trusting their science and chanting their approved language. The drones carry on, where safety and order are like drugs, addictive, controlling. But the call of the horizon burns in the souls of men. It is undeniable. Where is the pioneer? What is the horizon? For centuries until now, the frontier carried different names. The New World, the Northwest Territory, that great divide, the mighty Pacific, then an altogether different ocean. Then a culture of exploration gave way to cultural revolution. The sun set on the horizon of the mind, and the night has been dark. Men have traded their passion for the unknown to gain a desperation for comfort. The spark of exploration only a whisper on the fringes of society. Across generations, men risked their lives to forge into the unknown. For greed or glory, for legacy or destiny, for God or king, the frontier called, and until now, we always answered. Imagine those men trekking uncharted mountains or sailors on wild seas, star seekers, and fathomless divers, men who chose responsibility, character, truth. Now a new frontier is calling, and it only offers risk. While the masses huddle in the comforts and safeties of their well-ordered philosophical suburbs, there are those that are halfway across the wilds of the continent, halfway up the mountain, halfway to the stars. But for those who value truth over safety and liberty over compliance, we must tread where we may die to forge a clear road for those that come behind. The new frontier is chaos. It is replacing systems of control with standards of right. Over 200 years ago, dangerous men of character established something new and something fragile. A nation of pioneers built upon character. We are the new pioneers.
What's up, Sunrise Lounge? Welcome into a brand new season, season 3 of the Sunrise Lounge, the new pioneers. Welcome to episode 1, something new, something fragile. I've been looking forward to this season for a really long time, ever since I created the idea of the philosophy of the new pioneers, but then I had no idea how I was going to execute it. So buckle in, because we are in for an awesome and a challenging ride. We're going to work through American history, from the founding of the United States and the ideologies and the philosophies of that founding to the age of the frontier and its pioneer men and women, and learn valuable lessons and philosophies from those people from those time periods in order to establish our base camp from which we're going to work forward to explore the philosophy of the new pioneers. It's a system of thought that I've been developing when, by simple observation, I first noticed that if a person today stands for traditional values, those values being, among others, Christian morality, the existence and nature of God, right versus wrong, the nuclear family, responsibility and character, altruistic views of our place in the collective, self-sufficiency, and learning and the pursuit of knowledge. If a person stands for those today and operates in that framework, that person truly is on the frontier of our culture. That person truly is a cultural and mental pioneer. I cannot wait to explore this season with you. Season 3, The New Pioneers. Let's begin. Now, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Grab your drink of choice. I'm drinking out of my drink of choice mug right here. This is a Patreon exclusive. So if you want to get this, you have to sign up to be a member on Patreon. This is from the $10 tier. And there's actually rewards for being a member for consecutive months all the way out to a year. So every 3 months, you're going to get something really cool in the mail. And then there's the poster that you can see hanging up on my back wall there. And I'll bring up a screenshot of that here real quick that you can kind of see over top of the screen. What we're going to do today is introduce the idea and philosophy of the entire season, the New Pioneers. So we're going to talk through that. Okay, let's get into it. Now, when you think of the frontier, we automatically visualize that kind of robust mountain man in his buckskin clothes and his hunting knife or his, black powder Kentucky long rifle. And then, or you could think of maybe the space age when you think of the frontier, or like the new frontier from like the 60s and 70s. So if you know the sci-fi shows from back then, you'll know what I'm talking about with the final frontier. We think of pioneers. We may visualize wagon trains, wide open ranges, huge blue skies. And then, of course, there's this inside joke about the video game from the 80s or 90s, Oregon Trail, where everyone basically dies from dysentery every time. Like, it's an unbeatable game. What do all those ideas have in common? So they all represent men and women that were out there on the edges of the map, exploring little known or totally unknown regions, risking life and limb for discovery. That's where the comparison lies for what we're talking about this season. The concepts and philosophies that I stated earlier, that self-sufficiency, that learning and pursuit of knowledge, that responsibility, moral obligation, that you're on the edge of culture in postmodern human society if you believe in and stand for those things. And especially if you're actively supporting those things verbally in the public square, which is social media now, instead of like back then when it was actually a public square. They no longer serve as the core values of our culture. And a lot of people will argue that there's, of course, the silent majority that doesn't live online and isn't on Twitter. And it's always like this super, super loud minority that's basically running the government and running Hollywood and all the media output. And that is an arguable fact. And I tend to believe that. But it doesn't matter what that silent majority is believing or is doing because they're silent, right? So the public sphere, this public exchange of ideas, the public square is happening on social media and in Hollywood and in digital media and in traditional media like film and TV and music. So that's where we have to make our stand and be pioneers. So if you believe in the ideas that we've stated above and you live by them, we are truly now the new pioneers. So I'll leave my research works that I used in the show notes every episode if it's a specific item for that episode. But overall, I'm just going to give you a list of the source material that I used to research for this season. Number one, what we're looking at is one of the biggest pieces that I used was Thomas G. West's college textbook, The Political Theory of the Founding of the United States. So, that's like not the official, I have it written down here, but that's not like the official full title. I just kind of typed it in real quick. Then I used some selected presidential inauguration speeches because I own a book that is just all the presidential inauguration speeches because I like to read that stuff. My favorite book when I was a kid, and my parents can vouch for this, was a 12th grade history textbook. Like genuinely, that was my favorite actual book. Then there's the Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Kentucky Bill of Rights. I looked at founding documents and legal documents, not only for the Union overall, the full United States, but also looked at individual states. Those four that I used, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Kentucky, this was totally not on purpose, but they're the only four states among the Union that are actually founded as commonwealths. Then I think the most important document in the United States founding and still in United States history, outside of the Declaration of Independence, and then maybe the U.S. Constitution, which I actually think this document is more important, is the Northwest Ordinance. It was ratified. It was put into place by the federal government in 1787, 2 years before the American Constitution, which was 1789. I think it's really, really important. It set a precedence that got us to where we need to go and set the soul in place for America in the right place. Especially when we talk about, equal rights and liberty, but then also slavery continuing. So, and then lastly, a couple things, The Pioneers, which is a book by David McCullough. His books read like novels, but they're non-fictional history. So definitely check out David McCullough. And then lastly, a founding father and one of the more fiery and more inflaming founding fathers, which we need even today. The people that you kind of want to look at and be like, hey, like chill. A little bit, or maybe not be too edgy. trying to be that here in the Sunrise Lounge, right? So this guy kind of fits right in. He would probably listen to the Sunrise Lounge. I hope I'm not presuming too much with that, which I probably am, but it's fine. Thomas Paine's two different books, The Crisis and Common Sense, which is probably the one you've heard of. That's kind of the foundational pieces that I use. And then there's a lot of other places I've gathered information from and done research on. So just wanted to run through that to give you an idea. If you want to look those up and read through them, or at least have some quick idea, I'll post all my content again and source material in my show notes every episode. So Sunrise Lounge, let's get to work. But coffee first. So episode 1, something new, something fragile. Just to start out, to set the tone, when the American founders were beginning this nation and creating and crafting and designing the framework for which the United States of America would become a nation and would survive and thrive and operate and function as a nation, it is fragile, and it was fragile, and they knew that. There were systems that they had to put in place to make sure it lasted, and so far, it's lasted 250 years in some iteration of it, even though we've undergone a lot of cultural and political changes. Again, we'll talk about that later in future seasons and later down the road in this season. But the United States of America do not work without 3 key factors on our end, not the political end, not the document end, not the legal end. All the founding framework doesn't work without 3 key factors from the actual citizens of these United States. Number 1, moral obligation. Number 2, self-restraint. Number 3, individualism. All right, so Christian values are the root of moral obligation, first factor. Our Declaration of Independence even opens by stating that the United States intended to assume their place among the powers of the earth, a place which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. So it's not just this human morality or this philosophical idea of good and evil or right and wrong. It's based firmly in the Christian standard of morality. Now, without a clearly defined standard of right and wrong and the obligation of the individual to pursue, defend, and live by that moral standard, the United States don't work. Also, if you hear me referring to the United States in the plural, that's how it should be referred to. That changed around the Civil War, where we started talking language like the United States is, as in the U.S. was a full singular entity. I'm trying to bring it back here, so help me out, Sunrise Lounge. If you're a member of the Sunrise Lounge, start using it in the plural. The United States are. All right, the United States don't work without clearly defined standards of right and wrong. Now, that leads us to self-restraint, that second primary factor. And honestly, a quick glance at any social platform and even literally a mouth-breathing, slack-jawed imbecile is highly likely to just stumble upon or at least fully notice a complete lack of self-restraint in our culture. Now, we live in the age of if it feels good, do it philosophy, or live your truth, or relative morality, if you want to use like a real official term for it. Self-gratification and self-aggrandizement are how we operate in today's culture, especially the United States and in Western culture. Now, the antidote of which we will definitely be talking about, the antidote to self-aggrandizement and self-gratification. So now both the Bible and a principal defining factor in the generations that founded and pioneered the United States demand that we don't think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. There's a certain humility in understanding your place and self-awareness that is necessary to the success of our culture and our society. Self-confidence is not something to disdain. It is definitely something that we want to have as a part of our makeup as human beings. But unrestrained self-confidence leads to full-on narcissism, and so self-restraint is essential to both the political function of these United States and the societal function of our population as a whole. Now, that last key factor, individualism. This is a factor that we've lost in a deeply, deeply tragic way. We have become a culture completely dependent on collectivism and factions and group identity. We must have a community identity or we feel deeply lost and become totally non-functioning. Our identity is totally handcuffed to the collective whole, and it's a survival thing. Socially and sometimes literally. Now, you may want to argue that being a part of a community makes you and the community you're in stronger and more resolute. For example, the founding precept of the Commonwealth of Kentucky openly declares that united we stand, divided we fall. So there are merits to that sort of collectivism and being a bigger part of the bigger community. Now, while there are virtues to being a part of the collective whole, it's dangerous to root your identity in that system. For example, in the book Quiet by Susan Cain, There are studies that show psychologists that study extroversion and introversion and then human behavior in collective arrangements have produced studies that strongly suggest that our minds, when operating in a collective, don't just tend to go with the majority opinion because we don't want to be controversial or be the odd man out. Our minds actually change their internal function, the subconscious function, to force believe that what the collective has decided is actually the right thing. When in a situation, these studies show that the individual will be able to look at a problem and determine the right and wrong answer and know the right answer very clearly. These were not designed to be difficult questions. But then when they got in the hole and they had these plants in there, these control folks in the experiment, and they would just like all collectively agree that the wrong answer was wrong, they actually showed brain activity that these non-control subjects, the people they were actually experimenting with, their brain function actually changed. So they didn't just like consciously decide, but like subconsciously, their brain would decide. So regardless of evidence, regardless of morality, regardless of its rightness or wrongness, their brain would force believe what the collective had decided. Now, there is an argument that we have like this primal fear of being the odd man out or rocking the boat, which is rooted in our ancestral ancient need for the protection of the group against predators. But it's more than an active choice to keep with the majority for self-preservation. Our minds actually force subconscious changes to the way we perceive the issue or the question at hand. So being an individual thinking for yourself, it's not a personality trait. It's a choice. It's a practice. It's a strategy that you have to learn and hone and become adept at. It's a skill. The founders understood this. They laid the responsibility for the longevity and the collective success of these United States squarely at the feet of the individual citizen and his capacity for individual agency. Now, where the founders believed that this hyper-individualism, which, by the way, was viewed and still is in some ways as a very American trait, this hyper-individualism was balanced by moral obligation and self-restraint. So it all balances itself out. It was actually really well designed. And provided we do the right things and operate in that system, it works really, really well. So the conversation comes full circle. And I hope you enjoy that because I thought it was an absolute home run. But anyway, when the founders established the philosophical foundations by which the nation would root its identity, their entire structure was built upon a two-pillar system of rights and duties. Now, we've heard plenty about rights as Americans. I mean, we hear that word daily in some capacity in the news, on X/Twitter, anywhere in the social sphere, in the social public, especially in this culturally and politically supercharged environment. I mean, we live in this today where politics has superseded classic pop culture as the new pop culture. I mean, we hear it from the I know my rights people to the civil rights and trans rights, reproductive rights, and all the other rights that people talk about nonstop in this postmodern concept of rights and how that changed from what rights were perceived as at the founding in the 18th century versus post-1960s postmodernism. And that concept of rights, things are very, very different. Now, what we rarely hear about are duties. What are we expected to do as American citizens and just purely as humans on this planet? Society is relatively mute in that regard. The founders talked a lot about rights, of course, as they should have, and establishing protections for those rights and how those rights existed outside the sphere of any single government. That government does not provide rights. It just declares these are your rights that we are going to protect, but they exist with or without our protection and with or without us saying so. That's all part of the natural law system that was developed in the 17th and 18th century, and philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke talk a lot about that. We're gonna reach into some of their philosophy and some of their work, some of their mental work for this season as well. But duties were things that were almost an underlying expectation, and you can see in a lot of the founding documents kind of these threads of duties kind of weaving their way through the philosophy. So it was like this underlying assumption that men would be active in their community. And now if I'm using a lot of masculine language and it offends you, just like figure it out, right? Because if I say men, I'm talking about usually generally humankind. Really, men are the one that have to step up to the plate. So that's like a total sidebar. We've got to get our men squared away and back in a place where they need to be so they can do what they have to do and be the foundation at the bottom of the pyramid. Back in the founding, men were expected to have certain duties. Now, of course, now every citizen, you can transmute that and translate that to now every American citizen, regardless of their sex or gender, and of which there are only two, so male, female, are expected to have certain duties that they perform. And we'll talk about that in this season. So what we're establishing here is the idea, something new, something fragile. So we talked about the something fragile through all of this. We've talked about the three factors that make the United States work. And without those three factors, they don't work. So what we want to talk about now is that something new part, right? So as we talk about that, what you need to understand is, and hopefully you do understand, is that when the United States was founded, this nation was founded on precepts and ideas and philosophies that were rooted in a lot of currently standing, like English common law and the British Constitution, the English Constitution, and even going back to the days of the Magna Carta in the 1500s. But what we're looking at here is that this was something absolutely, totally new. The idea of the United States and how it was structured, how it was built, it was called, and you might have heard this, I know you haven't heard this if you're a younger generation person, it was called the American experiment. This nation was. The political founding, the framework, all of that, the philosophies that operate the United States was called the American experiment. It was something totally new to give this idea of not just a democracy, but a republic, and they were kind of meshed together, and they only work as constituted when they are meshed together. You don't want a pure democracy because that becomes mob rule, to use a term, that becomes mob rule. And you don't want a full-on republic because as we see like in the Roman Republic, like we're going way back in history, or the Greek republics, they end up becoming an oligarchy, which is unfortunately what the United States kind of is at this point. Great Britain had turned into an oligarchy. France had turned into an oligarchy, which basically means rule by the very select high-end few, and usually that ends up being your really wealthy, your aristocracy. If you think of like the Marxist layers of society where you've got aristocracy, proletariat, bourgeoisie, all that kind of stuff. So we've got to get back to these roots of what this new thing was. And what's really cool is that we have an opportunity here as United States citizens to reestablish something new 2.0 and bring things back. But we have to get back into that place where we're being responsible and taking responsibility for and being active and being agents in our culture and our society and enacting our responsibilities and operating in our responsibilities that the founders both demanded and then just fully, just kind of subconsciously expected us to operate in. So let's review. As we're using this pilot episode 1, to establish what we're talking about, the new pioneers, we wanted to talk about what makes the United States work, what founding ideas and cultural ideas establish this nation, because they're important to talk about, because when we talk about things later on in the season, we have to have that foundation of where we're coming from and how this system of thought, the philosophy of the new pioneers works, because it's founded on those founding principles. So let's list out what makes you a new pioneer. According to the Sunrise Lounge, what we're going to be talking about this season: Christian morality, the existence and the nature of God, right? So the gospel of grace, go back to season 2, figure that out. Right versus wrong. The nuclear family, meaning a father and a mother creating a family and being active parents, good parents, responsibility and character. Altruistic views of our place in the collective, and then learning and the pursuit of knowledge as just kind of a general way of existing. You have those duties to yourself, but then you have these responsibilities to the collective whole, which is where that altruism and our altruistic view of our place in the collective come. That's the framework for the philosophy of the new pioneers. If you stand for those, if you believe in those, if you actively work toward those and developing those in yourself, and then of course encouraging other people in your community, and as we call them in the Sunrise Lounge, your spheres of influence. If you're actively pursuing those and standing for those and representing those, you are a pioneer on the frontier of culture. You're on the edge of the map. You want to kind of stand apart and not be the mainstream, because when something becomes the mainstream, a lot of corruption can start to happen. But if it becomes mainstream, then it becomes popular. And then people start doing this just because, as we talked about that groupthink thing, then you start to get people that are not consciously deciding to operate in these values and these moral standards and moral obligations, but you get people that are doing it kind of on autopilot. And that's not what you want, because that doesn't produce quality, that doesn't produce longevity, that's not founded in a foundation. It's done, again, by accident. And you never want to live your life on accident. Every time your feet hit the floor when you get up in the morning, you want to live that life on purpose. You want to do everything that you do through the day intentionally. And that's it, Sunrise Lounge. Firm handshakes for listening. I absolutely cannot wait to explore this season with you in the philosophies of the new pioneers. Be on the lookout for extra content. We've got some poetry videos coming out. Make sure you're subscribed to the Substack. You can get all the links to all the ways you can connect down in the show notes on the link tree. So go check that out. There's lots of stuff you can do there. It's a hub for getting connected in all the different ways for the Sunrise Lounge merch, Patreon, Substack, X, Instagram. So if you want to support the Sunrise Lounge, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button on every single episode. It takes literally less than half a second to click that thumbs up button. Do it as soon as you click into the video so you don't have to worry about remembering it later. And if you're not subscribed, which by right now, if I look at my statistics on YouTube, 56% plus of the listeners of the Sunrise Lounge are not subscribed. So hit that subscribe button. And if you want to stay up on content and not have to worry about searching for us and finding the Sunrise Lounge each time, hit that bell icon and make sure your notifications are set to all. That way, whenever new content gets published out, you'll know and you'll get a ping and you'll get notified of it so you can access it super easy. I want to encourage you to rate, follow, and share on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. And then, of course, you want to interact on Spotify, the poll and Q&A. On YouTube, you want to share it. You want to get down in the comments section. And in the comments section, let me know when you think of the pioneers, what is the image, the mental image that comes in your head if I say pioneer to you? So whatever your answer is, doesn't matter. I can't wait. Get down in the comments section. Now, go on Patreon if you want to financially support the Sunrise Lounge. That's the best way to do it. And speaking of Patreon, if you listened for this long, thank you very much. That gives our watch time a longer amount of watch time, which is great for the YouTube algorithm. But also, there is a bonus episode coming to Patreon, Patreon exclusive bonus episode. So get on the Patreon, go ahead and follow. You can follow for free. Now, if you want to financially support, I would love that, and that would help this go a long way in creating great content. You will actually have access to that bonus episode by being a member only, so for free. That's the first bonus episode we put out. So I want to make sure it goes to all tiers, not just paid tiers. So now I create custom Spotify playlists, so listen to those, enjoy those, follow those, add them to your Spotify. Last thing before we go, dad advice. Determine how you're going to approach your day. The first thing every morning when you wake up, make a conscious decision. Here's how I'm going to approach today. Whatever comes across your path, whatever ups, whatever downs, it doesn't matter what's going on. If you determine at the beginning of your day, set the tone in your mind of how you're going to approach the day and choose to approach it from a positive and mature standpoint. Do it actively, make an active decision. Don't just hope that you've got some sort of personality traits that you'll be able to get through your day and face those challenges through the day and the grind of the day positively. Determined to do it intentionally. That's my dad advice for you. And with that, we are done and dusted. Thank you so much for listening this far. I cannot wait to explore the rest of the season with you. But before we go, always remember, in the Sunrise Lounge, pull up your hood, stay smart, and I'll see you on the next one.